Listen only mode.
Hello everyone and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dursey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of APA Ohio and Vice Chair of the NIMBYism Division, and I will be the moderator for today's webcast. Today is Wednesday, December 3rd, and we will hear the presentation, Meeting Local Housing Needs with Smart Growth Tools. For technical help during today's webcast, type your questions in the chat box found in the webcast toolbar to the right of your screen, or you can call the 1-800 number shown. For content questions related to the presentation, type those in the questions box also located in the webinar toolbar to the right of your screen. And please do indicate if your question is directed to a particular panelist. And we will answer those during the Q&A at the end of the presentation. Coming up on your screen is a list of the sponsoring chapters and divisions. I'd like to thank all of those participating sponsors for making these webcasts possible and free to members. Today's webcast is sponsored by the Florida chapter. To learn more about all of our chapters, visit planning.org/chapters, and to learn about our divisions, planning.org/divisions. On your screen is a list of our final webcast for 2014, and to register for this webcast, visit utah-apa.org/webcast. We are taking 2015 sessions now, and the list will be available soon. To log your CM credits for attending today's webcast, visit planning.org, go to your dashboard, select Activities by Provider. Again, today's provider is the Florida chapter, and select today's title. This webcast has been approved for 1.5 CM credits for live viewing only. Some recorded webcasts are available for distance education. For availability of this, check our webcast webpage at utah-apa.org/webcast. Like us on Facebook, Planning Webcast Series, to receive up-to-date information on our upcoming sessions. And we are recording today's webcast, and it will be available on our YouTube channel. Just search Planning Webcast on YouTube. And you can request a PDF of the PowerPoint by emailing planningwebcast@yahoo.com. All right, I'd now like to introduce today's speakers. Jamie Ross is the Affordable Housing Director at 1000 Florida Friends of Florida, the President of the Florida Housing Coalition, founder and Director of the Florida Community Land Trust Institute, and board member of the Innovative Housing Institute. She authors the annual report on avoiding and overcoming the NIMBY syndrome for the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. With funding from the Rockefeller Foundation, she produced Creating Balanced Residential Communities, a macro media presentation based on primary research of best practices throughout the nation. She assists local government planners and community advocates with developing policies and ordinances, and has been making state and national presentations on the topic of smart growth tools for affordable housing for more than 20 years. Ms. Ross works on legislation and administrative rules to promote laws that assist in the financing and development of affordable housing. She has received numerous awards for her achievements in affordable housing and community development, including a Fannie Mae Foundation Fellowship in 2002 and most recently the Horizons Award for 2014 from NeighborWorks. Patrick Mayer is the Executive Director of the Innovative Housing Institute, the leader in inclusionary housing policy and practice nationally. Under his leadership, IHI founded the National Inclusionary Housing Conference, a gathering of policymakers and practitioners that disseminates best practices and research on inclusionary housing. IHI is the lead contractor for the development of the Baltimore Regional Housing Plan, an SCI-funded element of the Opportunity Collaborative. Mr. Meyer was instrumental in the development and implementation of the nation's seminal local inclusionary housing ordinance, known as the MPDU Ordinance in Montgomery County, Maryland, which has produced over 13,000 units of affordable housing. Patrick is a frequent speaker and leads consulting engagements on inclusionary housing and inclusive best practices throughout the nation. Gladys Schneider is a Technical Assistant Director with the Florida Housing Coalition. She has conducted training in technical assistance throughout Florida and on a national level assisting states, local governments, and nonprofit organizations in program design and implementation. Gladys has authored numerous articles on recovering foreclosure-affected properties for affordable housing, community land trusts, land banking, and energy efficiency. She also assists local governments and nonprofit organizations with all aspects of finance, pre-development, and general capacity building for affordable housing programs and specific projects. Her background in comprehensive planning includes the drafting and implementation of effective housing elements and land development regulations, integrating funding sources with affordable housing incentives. She has developed a methodology for the analysis of local government housing elements that incorporates strategic programs such as inclusionary housing, community land trusts, land banking, and incentive-based land development regulations. She has developed training modules in planning for affordable housing needs, pre-development, lease purchase tools, community land trusts, land banking, regulatory barriers to housing and recovering purchase tools, community land trusts, affordable properties. Schneider was certified by the Florida Green Building Coalition as a Green Building Designation Agent. Gladys has a graduate degree in urban and regional planning from Florida State University and is a licensed Florida realtor. Without further ado, I would like to turn the presentation over to Jamie Ross. Jamie.
Thank you very much, Christine. And I'm just I think I've now turned it over to myself. Christine, thank you, and I just want to go through just a little fast introduction, and I apologize, there we go, about the government's role in land use. So what we're talking about today is adopting and implementing smart growth tools, and that finds its foundation in what the government's role is in land use. So the government's role is to promote the public health, safety, and welfare, to be a good steward of the land, and to balance private property rights with public interest. So it's not for the purpose, let's say, of making an individual property owner much wealthier by using its zoning authority in a way that increases the property value of a particular property owner. And so what we're going to do in this webcast is we're going to go through kind of a comprehensive overview of key tools for smart growth, and that's inclusionary zoning, community land trusts, and accessory dwelling units. And I'm going to be finishing out the presentation with a discussion of avoiding and overcoming NIMBYism, because that's something that I think probably everybody on this call has had to deal with. And so at this point, I'll now turn it over to Patrick Mayer to get us started on inclusionary housing.
Thank you, Jamie. I want to say good afternoon to everyone on the East Coast or in the middle part of the country, and good morning to those of you who are listening out on the West Coast. It's great to have a chance to talk with you about inclusionary housing today. We're going to cover a lot of ground today, so I'm going to go fairly quickly, but I'll try to expand a little bit on the points that you'll see on the screen. Inclusionary housing is a regulation that relies upon the private sector to produce affordable housing. And I think most of you are probably familiar with inclusionary housing in general in terms of the general planning practice. Essentially, it works with the private market, requiring that a certain percentage of new or redeveloped housing be affordable. And that's done basically through local legislation, local law. It increases housing choices for low-income people and reduces segregation. And this is going to become an increasingly important local obligation with the eventual publication of the affirmatively furthering fair housing regulations at HUD. Local jurisdictions that are recipients of federal funding are going to have an obligation to take affirmative steps, and inclusionary housing policy is really a key tool to help take those steps. We say that housing policy is school policy, and that's really related to the issue of how children perform in various settings. In areas where poverty is concentrated, children go to schools that are heavily are minority occupied, and often really the children in large part of poor families and disadvantaged families. Studies have been done, most recently the study that's called Housing Policy is School Policy by Heather Schwartz, that demonstrates that poor children that have access to middle-class neighborhoods through inclusionary policies perform much better than their counterparts. And so that's a key way of connecting people to opportunity. And then lastly, inclusionary housing is both about producing affordable housing, but importantly, where that affordable housing is located. It really tries to break out of the bounds of what might be the less desirable parts of a town or city and give people a chance to live in healthy communities. We could turn to the next slide.
Christine, it is not going to the next slide for me.
Okay, try right-clicking and selecting next.
I'm trying to push it down.
There we go.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. In terms of the theory behind a mandatory requirement, mandatory inclusion of affordable housing, it's important to talk about really some important community values. Many of you, I'm sure, encounter this in your own communities. Affordable housing is necessary for a healthy economy and sustainable community. I think particularly as we're seeing that more and more of the employment growth in this country is in the service sector, people of low and moderate income are needed for the businesses and services throughout your communities. You need to have housing that enables them to live in some reasonable proximity to where they work. We have a saying as we talk about inclusionary housing that if you're good enough to work here, you're good enough to live here. And I think that's an important underpinning as a community value. A second bullet here, government land use authority increases the value of private land. This is a theory that's known as land value recapture. As planners, most of you are familiar with the investments in land development that result from changes in density, changes in the use that increase the value to the landowner. It's important that ownership be respected, but it's also important that the public benefit that results from those changes is offset with the requirement that affordable housing is part of that new development. And so that public benefit ought to be considered as things like upzoning or form-based zoning are adopted in your community. And lastly, affordable housing is often considered as a public benefit or a public use. And so it's important to recognize that it's a key thing to be considered as you adopt plans. When is it the right policy? It works when you have a strong interest in residential development on the part of private developers. When it's active and you're seeing lots of new residential housing being created in your community, but no affordable housing coming along with that. When there's a change in land use that increases the value of the property, one that offers the developer a chance to build more units or perhaps build a different type of units is something that you want to be able to reflect and capture the public benefit. Large-scale developments, PUDs, and new urbanism developments, also known as traditional neighborhood developments, offer the scale and the opportunity for investment where affordable housing ought to be made part of that new development. In terms of how it works, typically there's a minimum number of units that activates the inclusionary requirement, usually referred to as a threshold. What we see nationally is anywhere from 10 to 30 units in a new development or a redevelopment often will trigger the requirement. In good ordinances, there's requirements that the housing be comparable in quality and aesthetics to the market rate units. And I'll say that they may be smaller or of a different type, but you want units that fit in with the community and generally are not segregated in one corner of the development. They should blend into the community, and that's been accomplished in many areas around the country. There ought to be benefits or incentives that are available to the developer. There's a variety of things that are often called offsets that can be beneficial to the private developer and make this economically feasible. This can be things like lot coverage increases, parking reductions, expedited processing of various sorts. And so those are things that you want to array and make it beneficial to the developer who is having to include the affordable units. The affordability period is something that's often a subject of discussion. How long should these units that are being created in a otherwise unaffordable area be required to be maintained as affordable units? As this slide points out, it often will appreciate at a substantially greater rate because of the desirability of the community where this market rate housing is being offered. It's imperative that a long-term period of affordability go along with the development of the unit. This last thing is really, I'll say, one of the most important things is that the policies for the administration of the program and an opportunity for the developer to appeal the application of the ordinance to a particular project ought to be offered. Administration of these ordinances can be very challenging. Getting it right is something that it's important to take the time and attention that makes sure it works in your community setting. Just to touch on my own experience, I worked in Montgomery County for 27 years, much of it involved with the moderately priced dwelling unit law in Montgomery County. It's a very strong and progressive program in Montgomery County, which of course borders Washington, D.C., and has been a rapidly growing community for the last 50 years. One of the key elements that really enables it to serve lower income households is that the local public housing authority, the Housing Opportunities Commission, is able to purchase 1/3 of the MPDUs in order to extend housing assistance to lower income households. They do that by layering on additional subsidies of various types, including project-based Section 8 and low-income housing tax credits. That's an important ingredient, and we recommend that areas that are considering adopting an ordinance link the availability of these units to either nonprofits or housing agencies that are able to take advantage of that affordable offering. In the county, as it's noted here, there is now 13,000, 14,000 moderately priced dwelling units that have been created over time, and that's a record that has been built up over time and really reflects the long-term nature of the impact that a inclusionary program can have. In just brief summary, and we'll talk about this some more later, inclusionary housing policies should result in the location of affordable housing in areas of opportunity, hopefully near employment, and of course when private developers make choices about where they're going to build, they maximize the access to amenities, employment, transportation, typically very good public schools, and diversity in the community. So these are things that work with that market. They may enhance the benefits to the market rate developers, and there's something that results in good things for the larger community as well. Okay.
Okay, I think I'll step in
Jamie.
here. Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I'm stepping in here to talk about some legal issues, if I'm the lawyer in the group. So most real property laws are state-specific, and I know we've got people all over the nation here on this call. So I want to let you know that, I guess it was about 15 years ago or so, in Colorado, there was litigation over an inclusionary zoning ordinance, and they found that the state constitution, which prohibited price and rent control, would prohibit the use of inclusionary zoning in certain circumstances. So In Florida, we don't have a constitutional prohibition on price and rent control, but we do have a statutory prohibition on price and rent control. And so one of the things I do is, legislative work. And so I worked with legislators to amend our municipal statute, our county statute, and you see them there. They're identical, so that it says, notwithstanding any other provision of law, in other words, the laws in those sections, 156 and 125, which prohibit price and rent control, a municipality may adopt and maintain in effect any law, ordinance, rule, or other measure that is adopted for the purpose of increasing the supply of affordable housing using land use mechanisms such as inclusionary zoning ordinances. So I bring that to your attention because, again, you need to look at what the laws are in your state. In Florida, we have a lot of new urbanism developments, and affordable housing is a principle of new urbanism. And we saw in all the Hope 6 redevelopments, we, of course, had affordable housing. They were done in the new urbanism vein, and, because it was, required. But I call Florida the poster child for the need to require that new urbanism communities include long-term or permanent affordable housing, because you can just go through one and the other. And this was our original Seaside, Florida, and I know actually Robert Davis, who developed this, feels badly about the fact he thought he was doing employee cottages. But what happens with new urbanism is it's so darn desirable that no matter how small the units are that are built, they become unaffordable. Baldwin Park in Orlando was our former Navy base. We didn't have an inclusionary requirement there, and there's no affordable housing in all of Baldwin Park, and it's a great location for affordable housing right near everything, transit, shopping, just a wonderful location. Same thing with City Place, West Palm Beach. Before this was all developed, it was actually an area where there was a lot of homelessness and no affordable housing now. Patrick, I think I'll just go ahead and do this slide. This is from Tallahassee. We have an inclusionary zoning ordinance here. This slide is actually from a developer who was a market rate developer, and was not subject to the ordinance. It hadn't gone into effect yet. But he thought it was great and showed how he could do one large sort of McMansion house, or he could separate it into 5 lots. And so a little architectural creativity, and of course the flexibility of including different types of housing within the same area, the kind of flexibility you have, for instance, in a PUD. He would have the same profit whether he did an estate home or he did 5 attached townhomes. Okay, I shoot it back to you, Patrick.
Thank you, Jamie. These are a few of the best practices for inclusionary housing that we've found have been effective in places that we've worked around the country, and really reflect the fact that we're working with market rate development to incorporate affordable housing to help meet community needs. I'll say the first one is we think that the developer should not be economically impaired by the requirement that affordable units be included. And that often requires a good bit of work with the development community up front to really look at the cost of the affordable housing and what are the benefits that can be provided as the developer has to take on an obligation to build units that are less expensive. When you do that, and when you do it in a way that is respectful of the economic investment that developers have to make, often you get to a point where the developer really helps you shape an ordinance that is going to be beneficial both to the development community and to the community as a whole in terms of the affordable units. So spending that time and being, really dealing with the brass tacks of what it takes to build affordable housing can help bring the development community along. The second one is that density needs to be a requirement, because you really can't build affordable housing on large estate-type lots. You need to create denser communities, and you need to give the developer the ability to add additional units to offset the affordable requirement, and that ought to be by right, and it ought to be really entrenched in the law. So we think that that's an important element. This third one is one that's very controversial, and I'll say there's quite a lot of variation around the country. Often there is a, I'll say, a concomitant obligation or a parallel obligation where the developer who chooses not to actually build the affordable units can do a payment in lieu, where he pays into a local housing trust fund a certain amount of money to reflect his commitment to affordable housing. This is often used, and I'll say widespread throughout the country, but it does not really help achieve the inclusive expectation of inclusionary housing ordinances. What happens then is that the local community takes that money and uses it perhaps to do affordable housing in areas where there's already a substantial supply of that, and it may not add to the benefits of having a community that provides access to opportunity. So it's something that to be used very carefully if it's used, and usually as a, I'll say, a waiver or something that requires public consideration before an in lieu fee is accepted. With regard to the partnership effort with local government, this requires change in local government approach to planning and zoning practices, as well as to the administrative obligations that come with taking on inclusionary housing. You need to make sure that those things are considered and invested in to be able to have a strong inclusionary ordinance and one that's going to be effective. It ought to be flexible in addressing development issues. This requires staff expertise and I'll say the empowerment to work with development issues as they arise. It often, if you provide those flexible approaches to the development community, they're more likely to be able to work with you and to produce the affordable units you desire. And then lastly, as we touched on before, you don't want to lose the units once they're created. They should have long-term or perpetual affordability, and that can often be provided through the use of a community land trust as a mechanism to ensure that. And let me just touch on.
Patrick, I'm going to exercise my. We're running out of. This is something I think form-based. It'll be in the. You'll be able. People will be able to access it. But since it's already 1:30, I think we're going to. If people have questions on form-based, we'll address it for those. Okay.
Fine.
Okay. And I'm sorry. This is now we're turning over to. We're turning this over to Gladys. So Patrick, I thank you, and we'll come back for the Q&A with you.
Great.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. That was a good intro there. So I'm going to talk about why you would use a community land trust as the housing part of the inclusionary zoning ordinance, and talk a little bit about how they work and what they are and when you do them and when you don't. But basically on this slide, I want to jump down to the third bullet, and here you have your developer that you're requiring to create additional units that are affordable, probably on the site of the property, and they're not an affordable housing developer. So how are you going to convince them to pull this off and to create affordable units? And that's where the community land trust comes in. This is an organization that will carry out the mandates of the inclusionary housing ordinance. And so in this way, you're basically insulating the developer from the administration of all the long-term part of maintaining and operating affordable housing. And by doing that, you're kind of meshing with the inclusionary zoning requirements. So when Patrick was mentioning like the affordable period, all of that can be handled with the land trust, or the income level of the residents, or the pricing of the properties, or even the type of housing. All that can be handled by the community land trust. And there's benefits also to the home buyers. Community land trusts are mostly a home ownership tool. You can use them for rental, but when I explain the bottom line of them, it's basically for ownership. But what you're doing is you're creating these valuable homes as part of a new subdivision or development, and so you're investing quite a bit of money in them, and then when the family sells, if they just take the appreciation with them and the home is no longer affordable, you've defeated the purpose. So the land trust will have a formula to restrict their the amount of equity they take out of the home when they sell. So they don't get a windfall, but they do get an affordable home. And by doing that with these restrictions, you now have a permanent stock of affordable housing. And that's mainly a public interest part of it. So the local government has two roles here. They're creating the inclusionary zoning, and then they also will work to help support the creation of the land trust and guide them, and then they'll also be providing affordable housing subsidies for them to use to develop the homes or to help subsidize the purchase of them. So the CLT is basically a nonprofit organization, and they separate the values between the land and the improvement, the house. And by doing that, the land trust continues to own the land, the dirt we call it, and the home buyer owns the improvement of the house. And we're very used to this concept with commercial development, where the property owner maintains the land, and the store has a lease on it, and then they own their own improvement. And this applies it to housing. And the 99-year ground lease that the home buyer has a very nominal monthly payment, and it's basically just to maintain the control over that land, but they're not buying it, so it's not part of their purchase price. So that helps keep the home affordable. The ground lease, though, has the rules of the road in it, which are the resale requirements, the right of repurchase by the community land trust, and then it establishes what the fair market return will be. And so when you separate the house from the land, they're not buying the land, and so it's affordable. But when they sell, they would sell back to the land through the land trust, who would then take part of the appreciation, and then the owner gets basically their share of it. So the home buyer now, they're usually going to be people that are their choices to rent. And so now they have a chance to own a home and have that stability to get a return of equity. When they sell, they can deduct their mortgage interest payments, and then they have that financial stability of owning a home. So the public benefit, as I mentioned, you're creating this permanent supply of affordable housing. But you're also being more efficient with your public subsidies, because once you put your housing dollars into the property, it's basically going to stay there. And so you're not going to have families take the profits out of the home or the equity when they sell. And so you're keeping that property in the affordable housing stock for at least 99 years. The other thing that Patrick mentioned was affirmatively furthering fair housing, and this is a very good tool to create affordable housing and diversity in neighborhoods, and to create that what the affirmative housing requirements are looking for, which is basically diversity and accessibility to affordable homes.
Okay, Gladys, thank you.
Yep.
I'm going to handle this one. I've been touting Davidson, North Carolina for so many years, ever since I did that research across the country. Because what they did, they're using both inclusionary tools and the land lease, the CLT tool, although they didn't actually call them by either of those names. Basically, the local government elected officials decided they were just really tired of these cul-de-sac developments that were changing the cute nature of this town. It's just 20 miles north of Charlotte. And they didn't want to have to approve these developments anymore, but their code really didn't give them any choice. So they basically had a short moratorium and just redid their whole code and said, you know, we want to have more of that sort of new urbanism design, and we want open space. So the new code requires 50% open space. And then they said it also requires that whenever you're building any residential development, 12% of it has to be affordable, because they basically did an inventory and found that right at that moment in time, about 12% of their population was low income, and folks were leaving the workforce, and they were basically leaving town because they couldn't, the prices were rising as a desirable little college town. So they felt there was a public interest to not fall before that, below that existing affordable housing stock. Patrick mentioned that in an earlier bullet as a level of service. That's how they looked at that. And they did wonderful work with architects and charrettes with the community, because they found that they needed rental. Their data showed them that they needed rental. But the communities were single-family home ownership communities, and so folks didn't want to have, what they thought they perceived, the rental would look like, which was, taller brick buildings, that kind of thing. And they came up with a wonderful, again, getting back to architecture, wonderful design where they created 3 rental units in a structure that basically looked like a single-family residence by splitting it across horizontally and vertically. So there's a front door in the middle, as you see there on both sides. If you were to go around, there's an alley in back, and you'd see a front door just like the one you're looking at now on the other side. And then there's a walking up to the top unit. So it's actually a triplex. But you really wouldn't know it unless you studied it. So I'll send it back to you, Gladys.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the success of community land trust, because it's not something that is already out there and easy to obtain. It's a special kind of nonprofit, and there's a lot of different things that need to happen to make it work. And one of the main things is that the land is donated to the community land trust for a very low cost, and that's something the developer can do as part of the process, is set aside that land and then make it a donation to the community land trust. And that makes it possible to use the development funds they have to build the homes, and then keep the price of the land out of it. So that's very, very important. The next thing you need is a highly functioning nonprofit, and the nonprofit needs to be a housing organization that has a fairly focused mission to serve this population, and by selling the homes. They need to have a pipeline of buyers, so that when someone wants to sell their house, they can call them up and say, hey, I need to sell, and then the land trust will have a buyer that's on a waiting list that's ready to come in and purchase that home and take over whatever subsidies are in it and make the deal happen. So that's something that, say, a rental type nonprofit isn't going to have the skills to do. So it's a very specialized capacity that they need to have. And the home buyers need to be fairly well counseled also, so that they understand what they're getting into, that they're not going to get the full appreciation of the home when they move out. They're going to have to pay a ground lease, et cetera. And what we see is that in many of the land trusts around the country, the home buyers are really kind of into it, because they feel like they're creating this community of possibility and opportunity and stability. So there's a lot of trust to that puts the community in the community land trust. And one of the things that we've had trouble with over the past few years is finance for the buyers. And, land trusts don't have the same kind of fee simple title that other homes have. And so in order to get conventional financing, the ground lease isn't always accepted. And so what the community land trusts are ending up doing is they're working with the local lenders who will portfolio those loans. And once they build a relationship with their local lenders, and the lenders are into it, and they have a steady supply of financing, but it is a challenge that needs to be worked through.
If I could just jump in here on that, this really is a temporary issue. When most of the first-time home buyer loans were Fannie Mae, sold in the secondary market, there's a lease rider. Fannie Mae has a lease rider. for community land trust so that these loans could be sold in the secondary market. What happened was, with the financial meltdown, Fannie Mae became really a product that wasn't working for first-time home buyers, and so we were left with FHA, which did not have the lease rider. And so then we had to have local banks, as Gladys is saying, who are portfolioing those loans. But we were already seeing that changing, especially in South Florida, where we actually have a half a dozen community land trusts, so many that they actually have a collaborative.
So that's the financing part. Another part of it is the property taxes. And so if you visualize that you've got this full valued home that is being sold and the property appraiser goes to assess it, the tax bill that the home buyer is going to get, because they end up paying the taxes on the land also, is going to be pretty high. And so Jamie actually started the Florida Community Land Trust Institute, Florida Community Land Trust Institute, to assist local governments to not only work through developing the ground leases and et cetera for community land trusts, but also they went to the legislature to get legislation passed that would instruct the property appraisers to recognize the resale formula when they're assessing the property, and so they're not they don't have to assess the property at that full market value with the land in it. And that's really important to keeping the homes affordable for people. Jamie, did you want to add on to that? No. Okay. So I'm going to talk about another one of the incentives, the smart growth tools, and that's accessory dwelling units. And these are really kind of come out of traditional settlement patterns where you have mother-in-law apartments or, garage apartments where there's really 2 units on one property. And you'll find these in a lot of the older areas, and some of them are not being used that way anymore. They're non-conforming now because of density regulations, but it really is a good smart growth tool to create rental homes for people with very, very low income. And by that I'm talking about maybe seniors or people with special needs. So the accessory dwelling unit, which is a second unit, usually on a single-family detached home that has a full living facilities, a bathroom, kitchen, and a living space. They use the existing infrastructure so that you're already there. The house is there, the infrastructure is already coming in, and so you're not creating urban sprawl and building more houses further and further out, and you're also not taking previously undeveloped land to develop it for new housing, affordable or other. So there are a lot of considerations for it. Some communities are very enlightened about it, and others it just doesn't work. But the main thing is that the affordability part, it doesn't have to be an affordable housing program at all. You don't have to restrict the income of the tenants. You can assume that they will already be, the units will already be affordable by nature of their size. And so it doesn't have to be an affordable housing program. It can be, and you can create extra incentives for that, but it doesn't need to be. So
I'll just add one thing to that. We have seen in areas of gentrification, downtown areas, like for instance when Orlando's downtown really went through a gentrification or redevelopment, which was great for the community, but they did permit the garages to be used for apartments, and folks started doing bed and breakfasts out of them. So you do want to have, you might want some kind of regulation there, and it also gets back to that new urbanism issue that I brought up earlier, which is that if an area is really desirable, what you may have thought was an accessory dwelling unit is a carriage house there, and maybe not affordable, but by and large, what I agree with what you said. Just a couple of caveats depending on where you're located.
yeah, it can be too successful.
Right, right. And there you go, Gladys, some pictures.
Well, yeah, these are some pictures of them. You know, they're usually going to be subordinate to the main structure. They can be attached or detached. Each community that has an ordinance, they're usually created by an ADU ordinance, would specify all of that. But, you know, they're pretty difficult. In Florida here, we don't address anything that goes along with that type of land use pattern. And traditional zoning, you get one house on one lot, and it doesn't matter how big it is. And if you add a mother-in-law or just a guest room, then you're out of conformity with zoning. So it's not going to work naturally. You have to do something about it. You know, you can create them by right or by some type of permitting. You're going to have, most of the ones I've looked at have review policies where you have to go with a hearing and get special permitting, and so there might be community resistance. And Jamie will talk about NIMBYism, but you know, people want to know that there's not going to be cars parked all over the street, and that there's just going to be one family in there. It's not going to be a giant house in front of the smaller house and that type of thing. And so those things need to be addressed in the ordinance. So Florida actually adopted legislation that specifically names accessory dwelling units. Florida has a trust fund, the State Housing Initiatives Partnership, and that funding comes with the requirement to consider different kinds of incentives to create affordable housing, and so the accessory dwelling unit is part of that. And it's also in a statute that permits accessory dwelling units in all single-family zones, and so that encourages local governments to permit that. Now, if you have strong local government land use control, such as Florida, you don't need enabling legislation, but other states may need to do that to make it legal. Okay. Let's see, where's my other note? So one of the main things, of course, is that an accessory unit is on the property where the owner lives. Otherwise, you just have a duplex. And so it's required that it be part of that the owner reside there. And I mentioned that they can be conditionally permitted or just by right. The permitting process can vary quite a bit in terms of what you have to do to get there. A lot of them are pretty much like a rezoning, and I worked on one in Southwest Florida for quite a while, and by the time we had created all the regulations to make it happen and so everybody would like it, nobody came in to do them. And so, you know, it could be something that isn't desirable if it's too complicated. But for the size regulations, the standard that you see is that the accessory dwelling unit won't exceed 50% of the size of the main dwelling unit, or they will have a maximum square foot size. You need to think about well and septic and how the utilities are going to go in there, because you still have to meet all the codes. Some of the ordinances have design guidelines in it that require height restrictions, like 1 story or 1.5 stories, or compatibility with neighborhood architecture. Some require that the entrance be on the interior of the property, so you don't have 2 front doors facing the street, that type of thing. And then most of them have a parking requirement, and it looks like 1 space per bedroom, or even 2 spaces if you have a 2-bedroom unit. And so those are all things to put in there. Additionally, the type of unit, whether it's attached or detached, is something to consider, and the occupancy, whether it's like you only let family members in there, or even density of persons per unit, if you want to restrict that. The incentives are basically fee waivers or maybe parking relief. And when you're going to use incentives like that, this gets to Jamie's point that you really need to have it that you're actually requiring affordability. And so that would make that worth it to someone. And then there's always the monitoring of how you're going to continue to either monitor the affordability of the units or the density and operation of the unit. So the main thing is that the local government and the planning department really think about it and work closely with the housing department too, so that there's a good agreement on what the purpose is and the benefits. There's a couple of good examples out there, the Montgomery County, Maryland ordinance in Santa Cruz, California. They're easy to Google, and they both are so thorough that you get a whole index of all of these considerations that need to be looked at. So what do I have next here? Okay, Jamie's going to talk about NIMBYism.
Okay, thank you, Gladys. And great, on the accessory dwelling units, we really do love that as an aging in place strategy, because it can be that there's a caregiver that's living in the accessory dwelling unit that the elderly homeowner needs there. You can also flip it, as Gladys said, and it can be a space for an elderly person with a family living in the larger primary house. So it's a wonderful tool. So now we come to NIMBYism. NIMBYism never seems to go away. Used to be when I first started working on affordable housing, if you were building affordable apartments, using the tax credit program, let's say for seniors, NIMBYism wasn't an issue. The not in my backyard, nobody complained about it because it was going to be for seniors. Well, even those days have ended now, and we find that there's a lot of opposition, and it's very important that it be dealt with in a thoughtful manner. What I put up front is to know the law. It may be that someone else wouldn't put that as the first bullet, and would put what we're going to get to in a minute about working with the neighbors. But I think it's very important that you do know what the Federal Fair Housing Act prohibits by way of discrimination. And in Florida, I was involved with just sort of on the sidelines. It was Legal Services who was handling this case, which is also from Southwest Florida. It was actually what we would call an upzoning in a mobile home park. Was going to be for creating single-family houses, not mobile homes, the stick-built houses for farm workers. And there was a huge NIMBY problem, and we very successfully overcame it by using actually a property rights statute that we have in Florida, which gives you a special master process that allows the local government to reverse its decision, because you don't want to ever get into litigation on affordable housing issues if you can avoid it, because it can kill the project just because of the time litigation takes. So we have this wonderful, actually, property rights statute, which never intended to be used for affordable housing, but it was used in that case for the farm workers, and it was successful, and that was a very successful development. But what it showed me is, well, it works well if you've got a protected class. Everybody knew it was going to be for farm workers, and so they were a protected class because of race, because all of our farm workers in Southwest Florida are Hispanic. So what do you do if you've got a prospective development? You don't know if you're going to have a protected class living there. So what we did in Florida, and I offer this as an example for you, the only other state that has followed us, to my knowledge at this point, is North Carolina. They've enacted such a statute. But we enacted an amendment to our State Fair Housing Act, and it's 760.26, and it prohibits discrimination based on the financing of the project. So whenever there is this, hey, we don't want this development, the city or county attorney is made aware of this statute. If he or she doesn't know about it, and then can inform the elected officials, hey, you're probably going to be facing some liability. So you can't turn this project down just because it's affordable, because it has tax credits or home funding or SHIP monies or any other financing in it like that for affordable housing. If you would approve it, because if it was a market rate development, you're going to have to approve it as an affordable development. So it's been a really helpful statute in Florida. So knowing the law, I put as the first thing. Now I'm talking about educating elected officials, because once a NIMBY battle ensues, it's usually too late to educate. So what's really important is, and especially for folks on the line who are planners, is to make sure that elected officials know what the need is in the community for affordable housing and how important affordable housing is for the local economy. Very important in overcoming NIMBYism to garner allies from a broad range of interests. If it's, when we talk about NIMBY issues and heated NIMBY issues, if you can envision, and I think probably a lot of you on the line have been there, where you've got packed commission chambers, people with posters, people overflowing into the hall. Well, if everybody's against it and nobody's for it, that's a little problematic. So it's a good thing to mobilize members of the business community, clergy, social service agencies, law enforcement, potential or future residents of the property, and the media. Make sure the media gets the facts about the development and not the hype. So the point is that the developer needs, I guess now I'm talking really toward the developer, and or like the local government planner if they're helping them, or their private sector planner helping them get a development through. They need to address all the legitimate neighborhood and community opposition. And what I mean by that is, if there are concerns over property values or the schools or traffic and all that kind of thing, you need to address that. That needs to be addressed before the development goes before the elected officials for whatever approval it is that they need. And for a couple of reasons. One, because local elected officials want to know that, oh my God, I mean, why is this happening to us? Didn't anybody talk to the neighbors and try to work this out? So you need to be able to say, yes, we have. But more important than that is, once you've addressed, or the developers address, legitimate issues, and maybe, change the site plan to address some of those legitimate issues, and, had some compromises. Once that's done, and so all the legitimate concerns are addressed, if the opposition persists, and you can probably bet it will, you can state with certainty that that opposition is illegitimate, because we've already addressed all the legitimate concerns. So local elected officials being asked to act, it would be inappropriate, arbitrary, capricious, unlawful for you to not approve the development, because the only opposition you're hearing is opposition based in discrimination, which is unlawful. Inclusionary and NIMBY is an interesting situation, because actually, if you've got an inclusionary housing ordinance that the developer has to comply with, then the local government is able to overcome that opposition by explaining to them that this is the law in the community, and that affordable housing needs to be in that development by virtue of that ordinance. So I think what you can take from this, which I know we've really put out a lot of information in a short time, that there's no single tool that's the answer for all affordable housing needs. ADUs provide rental housing for extremely low-income households, as Gladys said. The community land trust, predominantly home ownership. Usually it's the people who are having to be renters because they're living in a very expensive community, but they would otherwise have thought they would be homeowners, and so they want to get home ownership, and this is a way of providing it to them. CLTs, of course, manage the permanent affordability for inclusionary zoning in a very effective way, and Patrick explained that. So inclusionary zoning can meet all the affordable housing market segments. One thing Patrick didn't say today, but I know he said in previous presentations, is that when you can use inclusionary zoning to get down to extremely low income, but typically you're going to have to supplement that for the developer with some finance tools to make that work. And so I turn it back over now to Christine, who is going to handle the Q&A.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think the first thing we're going to do is just take 2 quick polls just so our panelists know who our audience is. And everyone, again, feel free to type in those questions in the chat box and be sure to refer to whichever panelist you're interested in hearing a response from. So let me go ahead and launch our first poll. This is just to understand geographically where everyone is located. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this now, so everyone should be able to select their answer, and I'll just give it a moment. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close that, and then I'll share it with everyone. So it looks like our largest sector comes from the south, and then west, midwest, and then northeast. So we have a really great variety of folks from across the country. Okay, great. Now I'm going to go ahead and select our second poll and launch that. Do you have any experience with inclusionary housing or inclusionary zoning, anything like that? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close that, and then I'll share the results with everyone. Interesting. So we've got a lot of yes, some, a little bit, a lot of no's, no, not at all, and just a few of yeses, both feed in. So I'm going to go ahead and hide this poll and get our other screen back up, and we can jump into some questions. Okay, first question. How do you address the fiscal impacts on school districts from the reduced assessments? Doesn't this virtually guarantee opposition from school districts? So this is for anyone who's interested in answering that question.
This is Jamie. So what that person who's asking that question must be referring to the community land trust model, which takes out the value of, well, actually what it does, I'm sorry, is it directs the property appraiser to assess the value of the property based on the resale formula. Because in that case, that is what the property is worth. So it's really not being assessed any differently from other properties, because you can't sell it. Let's say if it wasn't community land trust, you could sell it for $450,000. But because it's a community land trust property, you can only sell it for $175,000, just pulling these numbers out. So the property is going to be assessed at its resale formula. So that property owner is being assessed just like everyone else is being assessed, and in that is what the property is actually worth to them. Now, community land trusts are not going to be such a large portion of the housing stock in any community that the reduction in the amount of taxes that are collected based on using the resale formula is going to have any kind of appreciable effect on the taxes that are collected. We've never actually had that. I am not familiar with the school tax issue ever being raised in terms of community land trust. I don't know if anyone else has, like Patrick. I don't know. I've never seen it raised. Oh, no, Patrick, you probably wouldn't know that because you don't have that resource. That's a Florida thing. And no, it has not ever come up.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Has the Tallahassee Inclusionary Zoning Ordinance been challenged legally? And if so, what is the status or outcome of that challenge? Has any project actually been built to date to implement the inclusionary provisions?
As a matter of fact, it was challenged. It was immediately challenged by the local, I'm not sure if it was the home builders or the realtors or both, and they did lose the suit. So the ordinance was upheld, and then we came into the recession. So I'm not sure. I know I live in Tallahassee, but I'm kind of all over the state, and I haven't followed what's happened locally. So I can't answer that question about where it's applied. I did have that example where it was used when it actually didn't need to be used. I mean, it was optional. But yes, it was challenged and it was upheld and is in effect.
Thank you. Do any of you know approximately how many states allow inclusionary zoning and how many don't?
Hello?
Yes, the question was, do any of you know approximately how many states allow inclusionary zoning or inclusionary housing and how many don't?
Let me comment on that, Christine. There are several states that prohibit it at the state level. Texas is one. I think Washington State is another. Oregon has a prohibition that works to some extent. I think more often the state charter and legislation is silent, and they defer really to the local land use authority at the county or city level. There's probably some additional city or states that have language that essentially places the authority for significant changes with the state, where what are so-called Dillon rule states, if it's not explicitly in the Constitution, it needs to be authorized by an act of the state legislature. Virginia is one such state. So it's important really to look at your legal foundation where you are, consult your city or county attorney. But I'll say by and large, localities around the country have the authority to enact inclusionary ordinances, except in a few exceptions where the state has preempted that.
And if I could just add to that, there are hundreds of inclusionary zoning ordinances throughout the nation that actually identify themselves as inclusionary zoning ordinances. And then you have situations like I mentioned with Davidson, North Carolina. They didn't even think they had an inclusionary zoning ordinance. They just required that 12% of all new housing development be affordable. And so I found that in other places as well, that they don't say, oh, this is an inclusionary zoning ordinance. They just have a requirement in certain circumstances that affordable housing be built. And it most often happens in the horse trading that goes on with planned unit developments, and that, there's going to be affordable housing built along with the market rate housing, but there's no actual ordinance.
Thank you. Next question is regarding accessory dwelling units. The question writes in, accessory dwelling units make a lot of sense in our older downtown neighborhoods. However, there's quite a bit of concern from neighbors about the traffic, parking, and other density-related impacts that would result. Any suggestions for addressing those concerns or building support for accessory dwelling units in older, established, desirable neighborhoods?
Do you want to take that, Gladys?
Well, I was going to start and let you add on to it, but with any kind of innovative zoning techniques, the more planning you put into it beforehand, the better your results. And so it's really important to strive for excellent results so that the word doesn't get out and you don't suddenly get slammed with, well, that's no good, it doesn't work it was a mistake, that kind of thing. And like anything, you're going to need to get the buy-in of the residents. If you're going to do it by a neighborhood, then everybody's got to be involved in it. But a good analysis of the land use patterns of what you have on the ground and what you can feasibly do with accessory dwelling units will go a long way. I did some work in it. It was a municipality in southeast Florida. I'm not going to tell the name, but it was a new town, fairly new town, and the entire geography of that town was 5-acre horse ranch lots with a big house. And they're built out. And there's a little tiny commercial area, and then the rest are all these ranchettes. And so the state has affordable housing requirements, and they said, where's your affordable housing? And so we were called in to see if we could help. And what we noticed was that every single home had a pool house or a groom's room. And when I started talking to the neighbors about it, they say, oh, well, a policeman lives there, or someone's daughter lives there, or the groom actually lives there. So, and landscapers were living there. And so they had accessory dwelling units that were illegal because they were not in the code that you could have a unit there. They were just kind of built that way. And so it was a really good solution that you already have it, and they, could just legalize it and then meet the requirements. But you always need to have guidelines to go along with things like that. So Jamie, you can add on.
Yeah, I'd like to echo. I will actually just, I don't know if it's adding on, but echoing, I think what Gladys is saying is very important about doing an assessment of what you currently have. So the person who asked the question about, in your downtown areas, I think if you were to do an assessment of what you currently have in your downtown areas, you're going to find a lot of illegal accessory dwelling units. They're everywhere in especially urban areas that are unaffordable. And so by actually establishing an accessory dwelling unit ordinance, it is going to be more in the interest of the community that is concerned about these issues, because you're going to have requirements. Like, for instance, of course, they don't want a whole lot of extra cars, so you may be making a requirement that there's got to be a space for parking that car off street. So, it's going to be to the neighborhood's benefit to establish an ADU ordinance with criteria rather than let the illegal ADUs continue.
And another thing, I think it's Montgomery County, they require, it's a rental, and so they have to get a rental license, and so they are inspected. So that brings them in to be more professionally managed. And then Santa Cruz has an incentive that allows for tandem parking so that you can have one driveway with 2 cars in it, and even though they're different units. So you just have to look at what you've got, though.
Thank you. Next question. Do any of you know of any examples of form-based, context-based code as being successful at promoting affordable housing? So I think they're just looking for any examples to get some more information.
And I made Patrick skip that slide. We don't have.
Let me comment on that, Christine. We're working right now with Somerville, Massachusetts, which is in the process of doing a complete revamping of its planning and zoning code. They're doing it with an eye to adopting form-based zoning, but also really trying to strengthen the inclusionary housing ordinance that already exists there. So I'll say they will be an example, and they are very cognizant of the importance of integrating the two public benefits. So that's a step in the right direction.
Right.
I just wanted to add one thing to the previous question regarding the, I guess, how widespread inclusionary housing ordinances are. The National Housing Conference has been working on cataloging all the programs around the country, and they are at above 500 ordinances around the country now in 27 states. So there's really a active and growing community of places that are adopting inclusionary housing strategies. There are obviously some places that are affordable by their nature, and so there's not the the strong demand for new affordable housing in areas that are not seeing that kind of development and growth.
And if I could add on the form-based zoning, we had this in Miami-Dade with Miami 21, and was not a good result. And a big difference between Miami and Somerville is that Somerville, as Patrick said, they have a good inclusionary zoning ordinance right now. They know how important affordable housing is to their community, as it is about to basically be transformed, you know, because there's a rail line coming through, and it's going to be a much more desirable place, like Cambridge and Boston. And so they want to really get it right. And the problem with form-based zoning is, and inclusionary, is that form-based zoning by itself sounds like a really good thing, a progressive land use tool, but it will undermine your ability to ensure that affordable housing gets built, because one of the key ways that we do that is by recapturing land value, giving density in exchange for some affordability, and you lose that with form-based zoning. So in Miami, there just wasn't, in fact, I've been working down there with Miami-Dade for years on trying to get an inclusionary zoning ordinance adopted, and they never did that, and so they're in a very different place from Somerville right now, and I, like Patrick, really think that Somerville is going to be our shining example when they get through with their planning process.
All right, thank you. Next question. Does anyone have any examples of how complete streets can complement affordable housing?
I'm not sure what that question means.
I'm curious how complete streets can be complemented with affordable housing. That's the only, Diana, if you're still on the line, if you could text a few lines to make that a little clearer. While she's doing that, I'll ask another question. Has anyone seen any cases where exclusionary zoning has been preferable to inclusionary zoning? Yeah.
I think exclusionary zoning, which is quite widespread throughout the country, really is something that is adverse to inclusion and to affordability. It really segregates people by income, because if you want to live in an exclusive community, it usually comes with an expensive home, issues related to relatively low density land use, and things that make something attractive and expensive. It often doesn't take into consideration the needs for the type of families and households that can support those communities. And so we don't think of it as something that is desirable generally. I will say that it's very difficult to provide affordable housing in low density settings, large lot zoning, gated communities, places like that, because of the built-in expense of having to extend public services to those types of lots. So I think while it may be desirable for a local tax base, it's short-sighted in the long run.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think maybe Diana is off the line. And that seems to be it for our questions. Does anyone have any closing comments?
Well, we appreciate this opportunity, Christine. It's very, we really appreciate this opportunity. I'm glad everybody was on, and we're all available for follow-up. So you've got our contact information there, and all of us are more than happy to get an email or a phone call and and follow up.
Great. And so thank you, Jamie Ross, Gladys Schneider, and Patrick Meyer for joining us today, and for the Florida chapter for hosting this. Again, at the bottom of your screen, the CM credits, the number to plug in is at the bottom of the screen. And you can always email planningwebcast@yahoo.com for a PDF, or visit our YouTube channel to see this video and to share it. So thanks again to all of you, and everyone have a great week.
Thank you, Christine.
Thank you.
Thank you.